The thunder cracked like a bullwhip across the Montana sky as Pearl Harrington ducked into the dilapidated barn, seeking shelter from the approaching storm. April 1885 had brought nothing but trouble since she'd stepped off the train in Whispering Pines 3 weeks prior, and this sudden squall was merely the latest in a string of misfortunes. Her teaching position had fallen through, her luggage had been stolen, and now she was caught in a downpour miles from town with night approaching. Pearl had been walking the countryside, trying to clear her head and determine her next move when the weather turned. The abandoned homestead appeared like an answered prayer on the horizon. As she shook the rain from her skirts, Pearl froze. A small voice drifted from the hayloft above, not frightened or distressed, but conversational, as if engaged in pleasant discourse. "Mama, can you hear me yet? I told Papa you might not answer right away. He says I should stop talking to the wind, but I know you're out there somewhere." Pearl held her breath. The child couldn't be more than 7 or 8 by the sound of her voice. Careful not to make a sound, Pearl moved deeper into the barn, listening. "Papa says we have to be strong, but sometimes he cries when he thinks I'm asleep. I miss you something awful, Mama." Something in the girl's tone, that perfect blend of hope and heartbreak, made Pearl's chest ache. She knew that feeling intimately, having lost her own mother at 12. The memory of talking to empty rooms and starlit skies came rushing back. Pearl hesitated, unsure if she should make her presence known. A flash of lightning illuminated the barn interior, revealing a rickety ladder leading to the loft. Making her decision, Pearl approached it carefully. "Hello up there," she called gently. "I don't mean to intrude, I'm just taking shelter from the storm." A small face peered over the edge of the loft, golden hair hanging down like corn silk. Wide blue eyes studied Pearl with caution. "Are you an angel?" the little girl asked. Pearl laughed softly. "No, dear, my name is Pearl Harrington. I'm new to Whispering Pines. I'm Ellie Yates. My papa owns the Double Circle Ranch." The little girl's expression brightened. "Did you hear me talking to my mama?" Pearl nodded, climbing a few rungs of the ladder. "I did." "May I join you?" Ellie nodded eagerly, scooting back to make room as Pearl ascended the rest of the way. The loft was surprisingly clean, with a small oil lamp providing a warm glow against the darkening day. A worn quilt was spread across the hay, and atop it sat a small rag doll and a book. "This is my special place," Ellie explained. "Papa doesn't know I come here. It's closer to heaven, so Mama can hear me better." Pearl sat beside the child, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "How long has your mama been gone, Ellie?" "2 winters." Ellie picked up her doll, straightening its fabric dress. "Papa says she's in heaven now, but sometimes I think the wind carries her voice. That's why I come here to talk to her." Pearl's heart constricted. "I lost my mother too when I was a bit older than you." Ellie's eyes widened. "Did you talk to her after she was gone?" "Every day," Pearl smiled softly. "I still do sometimes." Thunder boomed overhead and Ellie jumped, instinctively moving closer to Pearl. Without thinking, Pearl wrapped an arm around the child's shoulders. "My papa will be worried," Ellie said suddenly. "He doesn't like me wandering off when storms come." Pearl glanced outside through a gap in the barn wall. The rain was coming down in sheets now. "Does he know where your special place is?" Ellie shook her head. "It's a secret, but he'll be out looking soon. He always finds me." As if summoned by the words, the barn door burst open and a tall figure entered, water cascading from a wide-brimmed hat and long oilskin coat. Eleanor Rose Yates. The deep voice was strained with worry rather than anger. "Answer me, girl." "Up here, Papa," Ellie called, scrambling to her feet. "I'm not alone." The man's head snapped up and Pearl found herself pinned by the most piercing green eyes she'd ever encountered. His hand instinctively moved to the holster at his hip. "Who's there with my daughter?" His voice was like iron, protective and unyielding. Pearl raised her hands slightly. "Pearl Harrington, sir. I was caught in the storm and took shelter. I mean no harm." The man studied her for a long moment before relaxing his stance. "Come down, both of you." Pearl helped Ellie gather her things before descending the ladder first. Up close, Ellie's father was even more imposing, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and hardship. His dark beard was neatly trimmed, contrasting with hair the same golden shade as his daughter's. I'm Kade Yates, he said, extending a hand that dwarfed Pearl's. Apologies for the greeting, but strangers near my daughter make me cautious. Perfectly understandable, Pearl replied, noting the wedding band still present on his left hand. Your daughter has been excellent company during the storm. Kade looked down at Ellie with a mixture of relief and exasperation. This little wildcat knows better than to wander off before a storm. I was talking to Mama, Ellie said defensively, and Miss Pearl found me. She talks to her Mama in heaven too. Something shifted in Kade's expression, a flicker of pain quickly masked. Is that so? He turned his attention back to Pearl. You're new to these parts, Pearl nodded. 3 weeks in Whispering Pines, I came for a teaching position that didn't work out as planned. The school teacher position. Kade's brow furrowed. I thought the town council confirmed someone from back east. They did, me, Pearl sighed. But upon my arrival, I discovered they expected a married woman. Apparently that detail was lost in our correspondence. That sounds like the work of Martha Prescott, Kade muttered. She's been trying to marry off her nephew to any female teacher who comes to town. Ellie tugged at her father's coat. Can Miss Pearl come home with us, Papa? The storm's awful bad. Kade glanced outside. It's no night for anyone to be wandering. He turned back to Pearl. Where were you headed before the storm hit? Back to town, Pearl admitted. Though I've been considering moving on, without the teaching position, my prospects here are limited. Kade considered this for a moment. Our ranch is closer than town. You're welcome to wait out the storm there, and I can take you to town tomorrow. Pearl hesitated. While accepting hospitality from a man she'd just met wasn't proper, neither was spending the night in an abandoned barn during a violent storm. Please come. Ellie pleaded, slipping her small hand into Pearl's. You can tell me more about talking to heaven. That decided it. Pearl squeezed the little girl's hand. Thank you, Mr. Yates. I accept your kind offer. Kade nodded, then removed his oilskin coat and draped it over Pearl's shoulders. It's just Kade, and you'll need this more than I will. The coat was warm and smelled of leather, tobacco, and pine, not unpleasant at all. Pearl pulled it tighter as Kade lifted Ellie onto his horse before mounting behind her. He extended a hand to Pearl. You'll have to ride double with us. Stormy here can handle it. Pearl took his hand, surprised by the strength with which he pulled her up behind him. She hesitated before placing her hands lightly on his waist. You'll fall off that way, he said over his shoulder. Hold on proper. Swallowing her embarrassment, Pearl wrapped her arms around his solid middle as they set off into the rain. Ellie chattered the entire journey, seemingly unaffected by the downpour. Pearl, meanwhile, was acutely aware of the impropriety of her situation, and of the way Kade's body generated heat like a wood stove on a winter morning. The Double Circle Ranch appeared through the rain after 20 minutes of riding a sturdy 2-story house with a wide front porch, flanked by a large barn and several outbuildings. Warm light spilled from the windows, promising comfort within. A woman in her 60s rushed onto the porch as they approached. Lord Almighty, Kade Yates, I was about to saddle up and find you myself. We're fine, Mrs. Abernathy, Kade called as he reined in the horse. Found this little runaway and picked up a guest while I was at it, Mrs. Abernathy's eyes widened as she took in Pearl's sodden appearance. Land sakes, you poor thing, let's get you inside and dried off. The next hour passed in a blur of warm towels, dry clothes borrowed from Mrs. Abernathy, which were too wide but manageable, and introductions. Pearl learned that Mrs. Abernathy had been the housekeeper and cook for the Yates family since before Kade was born, and that she now helped care for Ellie since Miss Catherine's passing. The ranch house was far more refined than Pearl had expected. Well-built furniture, actual paintings on the walls, and bookshelves lined with volumes that would make any teacher's heart sing. After a hearty meal of beef stew and fresh bread, Pearl found herself in the parlor before a roaring fire, with Ellie curled beside her as she read from one of the books from the shelf. Kade watched them from his chair across the room, his expression unreadable. When Ellie finally began to nod off, he rose and scooped her into his arms. Say good night, Alina, he instructed softly. Night, Miss Pearl, Ellie mumbled sleepily. Will you be here tomorrow? Pearl glanced at Kade before answering. I'll be here for breakfast at least." This seemed to satisfy Ellie, who nestled against her father's shoulder as he carried her upstairs. Mrs. Abernathy bustled in moments after. "Let me show you to your room, Miss Harrington. You must be exhausted." The guest room was simple but comfortable, with a feather bed and handmade quilt that promised a good night's rest. Pearl thanked Mrs. Abernathy and was preparing for bed when a soft knock came at her door. Kade stood in the hallway, holding a small leather-bound journal. "Ellie wanted you to have this, said you might want to write letters to your mama like she does." Pearl accepted the journal, touched by the gesture. "That's incredibly sweet, thank you." Kade shifted, suddenly awkward without his daughter as a buffer. "Mrs. Abernathy mentioned you're without employment. We've been looking for someone to tutor Ellie. The town school is too far for daily travel, especially when winter comes." Pearl stared at him, surprised by the offer. "Mr. Yates, Kade, we've only just met. I saw how you were with Ellie. She hasn't taken to anyone like that since." He cleared his throat. "And Mrs. Abernathy's not getting any younger. Having another woman around would do them both good." "What exactly would this position entail?" "Room and board here at the ranch, plus a monthly salary." "You'd teach Ellie her letters and numbers, history and such. Maybe help Mrs. Abernathy with some of the lighter household duties." He hesitated. "There'd be a proper contract, of course." Pearl considered the offer. It wasn't the classroom position she'd dreamed of, but it was better than returning east in defeat, and there was something about little Ellie that tugged at her heart. "I heard what you said to her," Kade added quietly, "about being the voice she misses. No one's been able to reach her like that when it comes to Catherine." Pearl felt her cheeks warm. "I only spoke from experience. Experience is a fine teacher." Kade met her eyes. "Think on it tonight. We can discuss details tomorrow." As he turned to leave, Pearl called after him. "Kade, thank you for the rescue today." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Seems to me you were the one doing the rescuing, Miss Harrington." Sleep came quickly that night, with dreams of golden-haired children running through meadows and a pair of green eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. Morning brought sunshine streaming through the windows, and the scent of coffee and bacon wafting up the stairs. Pearl dressed in her own clothes, now dried and pressed, Mrs. Abernathy's doing, no doubt, and made her way downstairs to find Ellie already at the table, chattering away to her father. "Miss Pearl," Ellie exclaimed, jumping up to greet her. "Papa says you might stay and be my teacher, will you?" "Please." Pearl glanced at Kade, who looked mildly chagrined at his daughter's outburst. "I was going to let Miss Harrington enjoy her breakfast before peppering her with questions, Ellie." "It's quite all right," Pearl said, taking a seat at the table. "And yes, Ellie, I'm considering it." "It's a very generous offer. You can have the room next to mine," Ellie continued excitedly. "And I promise to be the best student ever. I already know my letters, and I can count to 100. Mrs. Abernathy brought a plate piled high with eggs, bacon, and flapjacks. "Let the poor woman eat, child. There'll be plenty of time for planning once she's had her breakfast." The meal was delicious, the conversation lively as Ellie peppered Pearl with questions about what they would study first. Pearl found herself warming to the idea with each passing moment. When Kade suggested they discuss the particulars in his study after breakfast, she was already mentally unpacking her bags. The study, like the rest of the house, reflected a blend of frontier practicality and unexpected refinement. Bookshelves lined one wall, a large desk dominated the center, and maps of the territory hung beside what appeared to be architectural drawings of the ranch buildings. "Catherine was from Boston," Kade explained, following her gaze to a particularly fine landscape painting. "She brought her love of beautiful things when she came west, said there was no reason we couldn't have both usefulness and beauty. She sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was." Kade gestured to a chair before seating himself behind the desk. "Now, about this position. I'm offering $40 a month plus room and board. You'd have Sundays free, of course, and one Saturday a month if you wish to go into town." Pearl's eyebrows rose. The salary was more generous than her teaching position would have been. "That's more than fair. Ellie needs structure and education. I can teach her to ride and rope, but her mother would have wanted more for her." Kade leaned forward. There's one condition, Miss Harrington. Yes, I heard what you said to Ellie yesterday about her mother hearing her. I don't want you filling her head with false hope that her mother might somehow return or speak to her. Pearl chose her words carefully. I would never suggest anything so painful, but I do believe there's comfort in feeling connected to those we've lost. Sometimes talking to them, even knowing they won't answer, helps heal the heart. Kade studied her for a long moment. You truly believe that? It helped me survive losing my mother and father. I'd sit by the window each night and tell them about my day. It made them feel less gone. Pearl met his gaze steadily. I won't encourage magical thinking, but I won't take away a comfort that harms no one. Kade nodded slowly. Fair enough. He pulled out a document from his desk drawer. I had Mrs. Abernathy draft this agreement while you were still asleep. If the terms are acceptable, we can begin today. Pearl read through the document, which outlined everything they'd discussed plus provisions for illness, termination of employment, and even transportation into town when needed. It was thorough and fair. It seems we have an agreement, Mr. Yates, Pearl said, accepting the pen he offered and signing her name. Welcome to Double Circle, Miss Harrington. Kade's handshake was firm but gentle. Pearl's intended short stay at the Double Circle Ranch quickly stretched from days into weeks, and weeks into months. Spring blossomed into summer, and Pearl found herself settling into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Mornings were devoted to Ellie's lessons in the small room Kade had converted into a schoolroom. Afternoons often found them outside, with practical lessons in botany while gathering herbs with Mrs. Abernathy, or learning about animal husbandry as they helped with the chickens and the garden. Ellie proved to be a quick study, absorbing knowledge like the parched earth soaked up rain. But it was the child's heart that truly captivated Pearl. Beneath her cheerful exterior lay a depth of feeling that sometimes took Pearl's breath away. One evening in late June, Pearl found Ellie sitting alone on the porch swing, staring at the sunset with an intensity unusual for a child her age. May I join you? Pearl asked, already knowing the answer. Ellie nodded, scooting over to make room. I was watching the colors change and wondering if Mama can see the same sunset from heaven. Pearl settled beside her. What do you think? I think heaven probably has even prettier sunsets, Ellie decided after a moment of consideration, but I bet she still watches ours because we're here. Pearl smiled. That's a lovely thought. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the swing creaking gently as they rocked. Papa smiles more since you came, Ellie said suddenly. Not just with his mouth, but with his eyes too. Pearl felt a flutter in her chest that had become increasingly familiar whenever Kade was mentioned. Your father is a good man. He works very hard to give you a good life. He likes you, Ellie stated with the matter-of-fact certainty of childhood. He watches you when you're reading to me. And he put on his good shirt when we all went to town last Saturday. Pearl felt her cheeks warm. Ellie, it's not polite to, do you like him back? Ellie interrupted, turning to face Pearl directly, because I think you do. You get all pink when he comes in for dinner, and you always make sure his coffee cup is filled first. Pearl found herself at her rare loss for words. How did one explain the complexities of adult emotions to a child, especially when she herself was struggling to understand them? Your father and I have a professional relationship. I work for him, teaching you. Ellie's brow furrowed. Mrs. Abernathy works for Papa too, but she doesn't look at him like you do. Pearl was saved from responding by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Kade appeared around the bend in the road, returning from a day of checking the far pastures. His Stetson was pushed back on his head, and even from a distance, Pearl could see the exhaustion in the set of his shoulders. Papa's home. Ellie jumped up and raced down the porch steps. Pearl watched as Kade's entire demeanor changed at the sight of his daughter. He swung down from his horse and caught Ellie mid-leap, spinning her around before setting her on his shoulders. Their laughter carried across the yard, warming Pearl in ways the summer sun never could. As they approached the house, Kade's eyes met Pearl's, and that now familiar flutter returned to her chest. Evening, Miss Harrington, he called, his voice carrying a warmth that hadn't been there when they first met. Mr. Yates, she responded with a nod. Dinner's nearly ready, Mrs. Abernathy made your favorite venison stew, music to a hungry man's ears. He lifted Ellie from his shoulders. Go wash up, Wildcat. I need to see to Stormy before I come in. As Ellie dashed inside, Kade led his horse toward the barn. Pearl found herself following him, drawn by an impulse she didn't fully understand. The barn was cool and dim after the bright evening sunlight. Pearl waited quietly as Kade removed Stormy's saddle and began brushing the animal down. Was there something you needed, Miss Harrington? Kade asked without looking up. I wanted to speak with you about Ellie's progress, Pearl said, seizing on the first professional excuse that came to mind. She's advancing remarkably well with her mathematics. Kade nodded, continuing to brush his horse with long, even strokes. She's always been quick with numbers. Gets that from her mother. Catherine could calculate figures faster than most men I know with a pencil and paper. She mentioned Catherine was from Boston. Was she a teacher as well? Kade shook his head. Banker's daughter. Came west with her brother after their parents died. Met her at a harvest dance in town. A small smile touched his lips. She was the most elegant thing I'd ever seen, wearing a blue dress that matched her eyes perfectly. Ellie has her eyes, Pearl observed softly, and her spirit. Kade finished with the brush and patted Stormy's flank before turning to Pearl. But that's not really what you came out here to ask me, is it? Pearl felt as transparent as glass under his direct gaze. No, she admitted. Ellie said something that made me wonder about the propriety of my position here. Kade's brow furrowed. Has someone in town been gossiping? Because I'll set them straight quick enough. No, nothing like that. Pearl took a steadying breath. Ellie seems to believe there might be feelings developing between us. I assured her our relationship is purely professional, but I wanted to make certain we're presenting the right example. Kade was silent for so long that Pearl began to regret bringing up the subject at all. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully measured. And is that all there is between us, Miss Harrington? A professional arrangement. The question hung in the air between them, weighted with possibilities Pearl had scarcely allowed herself to consider. She looked up to find Kade watching her intently, waiting. I don't know, she answered honestly. I came here to teach Ellie not to complicate things. Kade stepped closer, close enough that Pearl could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. Life has a way of getting complicated all on its own, with or without our help. Kade, Mr. Yates. Miss Harrington, Mrs. Abernathy's voice called from the house. Dinner's on the table and getting cold. The moment shattered like fine china dropped on stone. Kade stepped back, and Pearl felt the loss of his proximity like a physical thing. We should go in, she said, already turning toward the barn door. Kade caught her wrist gently. This conversation isn't finished, Pearl. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. No, she agreed softly. I don't believe it is. Dinner that evening was a strangely charged affair, with Ellie oblivious to the undercurrent of tension between the adults at the table. Mrs. Abernathy, however, was more perceptive. Her knowing glances between Pearl and Kade spoke volumes. As July progressed, the temperature wasn't the only thing rising at the Double Circle Ranch. Pearl found herself increasingly aware of Kade's presence, the sound of his boots on the porch, the rumble of his laughter at something Ellie said, the way his hands dwarfed his coffee cup at breakfast. Their interrupted barn conversation remained unfinished, both seemingly waiting for the right moment to continue it. That moment came on a scorching afternoon when Ellie was napping, and Mrs. Abernathy had gone into town for supplies. Pearl was in the garden, gathering tomatoes for supper, when Kade's shadow fell across her basket. You shouldn't be out in this heat, he said, offering a hand to help her up from her kneeling position. Pearl accepted his assistance, noting how he didn't immediately release her hand once she was standing. The tomatoes won't wait for cooler weather. They can wait an hour or two, Kade nodded toward the house. Come inside, I've something to show you. Curious, Pearl followed him into the blessed coolness of the house and up the stairs to a door she'd never seen opened. Kade produced a key from his pocket and unlocked it, stepping aside to let Pearl enter first. It was a library, not just a few shelves, but a proper library with floor-to-ceiling bookcases, comfortable chairs, and a large desk beneath a window overlooking the mountains. Catherine's room, Kade explained as Pearl took in the space with wide eyes. She collected books all her life. Said they were windows to worlds she might never visit in person. Pearl ran her fingers along the spines of leather-bound volumes. It's magnificent. Why keep it locked away? At first, it was too painful to enter. Kade moved to stand beside her. Later, I suppose it became habit. But Ellie should have access to her mother's books, and so should you. Pearl turned to him, touched by the gesture. Thank you for sharing this with me. There's something else I'd like to share. Kade's voice dropped lower, if you're willing to hear it. Pearl nodded, her heart suddenly racing. I haven't felt much of anything since Catherine died, he began. Just numbness, punctuated by grief and worry for Ellie. I functioned, but I wasn't living, not really. He took a step closer. And then you appeared in that barn, talking to my daughter about heaven and wind and voices that might still be heard. Pearl remained still, scarcely breathing as Kade continued. You brought something back to this house that I thought was gone forever. Light, laughter, hope. His hand rose to brush a strand of hair from her face. I don't want to make you uncomfortable or risk losing what you bring to Ellie's life, but I can't pretend I don't feel something when you're near. I feel it too, Pearl whispered, the admission both frightening and freeing. But I don't want to replace Catherine in Ellie's life, or in yours. No one could replace Catherine, Kade said firmly, but that doesn't mean there isn't room for something new, something different but equally valuable. He was close now, close enough that Pearl could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, smell the clean scent of soap and leather that always clung to him. May I kiss you, Pearl Harrington? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. In answer, Pearl closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened as years of loneliness and months of unspoken desire finally found expression. Kade's arms wrapped around her waist, drawing her closer as Pearl's hands found their way to his shoulders. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Pearl felt as though something fundamental had shifted in the universe, like the earth itself had realigned. I should check on Ellie, she said, suddenly remembering their responsibilities. Kade nodded, reluctantly releasing her. We'll talk more later. Yes, Pearl agreed, touching her fingers to lips that still tingled from his kiss. Definitely later. As she left the library, Pearl felt lighter than she had in years. The future, which had seemed so uncertain when she arrived in Whispering Pines, was now opening before her like one of Catherine's beloved books full of possibilities she could scarcely have imagined. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of discovery. Stolen kisses in the library when Ellie was occupied with Mrs. Abernathy. Long conversations on the porch after Ellie was asleep, sharing stories of their pasts and tentative dreams of the future. Pearl learned about Kade's childhood on the ranch, how he'd built it up from the modest operation his father had left him. Kade, in turn, listened as Pearl spoke of her years in boarding school after her parents' deaths, her determination to become a teacher despite her uncle's objections. They were careful to maintain propriety in front of Ellie and the ranch hands, but Mrs. Abernathy's knowing smiles suggested their efforts at discretion weren't entirely successful. It was Ellie herself who brought matters to a head one Sunday morning in early August. The three of them were returning from church services in town when Ellie announced from the back of the wagon, I prayed for something special today. Did you now? Kade glanced back at his daughter with amusement. And what might that be? I prayed that Miss Pearl would become my new mama, Ellie declared. Not to replace my first mama, but to be the mama who's here now. Pearl froze, her eyes darting to Kade, who looked equally stunned by his daughter's straightforward declaration. Ellie, that's not something you should, Pearl began, but Kade's hand covering hers stopped her. Why did you pray for that, Alina? Kade asked, his tone serious but gentle. Ellie sat up straighter, clearly prepared for this question. Because you love each other, and because Miss Pearl already acts like my mama. She teaches me and braids my hair and listens when I talk about mama in heaven. She paused, her small face solemn. And because Mama told me it would be okay, Pearl's breath caught. When did she tell you that, sweetheart? In my dream. She said she was happy in heaven, but she was sad that we were lonely. She said it was okay to love someone new. Ellie's certainty was absolute. And I do love you, Miss Pearl, so does Papa, he told Reverend Foster last week. Kade coughed, the tips of his ears turning red. Ellie, that was a private conversation, but it's true, isn't it? Ellie persisted. You said you were going to ask Miss Pearl to marry you as soon as you finished making the special box. Pearl turned to Kade, her heart pounding. Is that true? Kade sighed, pulling the wagon to a stop beneath a large cottonwood. He turned to face Pearl fully, taking both her hands in his. This isn't how I planned it, he said, shooting a mock-stern look at his daughter. But yes, it's true, I've been working on a proper ring box to present to you. He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a small wooden box, intricately carved with wildflowers. I've been carrying it with me, waiting for the perfect moment. Pearl stared at the box, speechless. I love you, Pearl Harrington, Kade continued. You came into our lives like a gift from heaven itself. You've brought joy back to my daughter and hope back to my heart. He opened the box, revealing a gold ring set with a small diamond flanked by sapphires. Will you do us the honor of becoming my wife and Ellie's mother? Pearl's vision blurred with tears as she looked from the ring to Kade's hopeful face to Ellie's beaming smile. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, with all my heart, yes. Kade slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a kiss that promised a lifetime of tomorrows. Ellie's delighted squeal broke them apart, and then the child was scrambling over the wagon seat to throw her arms around both of them. Does this mean I call you Mama now? Ellie asked, her eyes bright with joy. Pearl brushed a golden curl from the child's forehead. You can call me whatever feels right in your heart, Ellie. I'll love you just the same. I think my heart wants to call you Mama Pearl, Ellie decided, so my first Mama still has her special name too. Mama Pearl it is then, Kade agreed, his arm tight around Pearl's waist. Now, shall we head home and tell Mrs. Abernathy she has a wedding to help plan? The wedding took place in October, when the aspen trees turned the mountainsides to gold. The entire town of Whispering Pines turned out for the occasion, even Martha Prescott, who had apparently forgiven Pearl for not marrying her nephew. The ceremony was held on the ranch, with Ellie proudly serving as flower girl and Mrs. Abernathy dabbing at her eyes throughout the proceedings. Pearl wore a dress of ivory satin with lace trim that Mrs. Abernathy and two other ranch wives had worked tirelessly to complete. Kade, resplendent in a new black suit, looked at Pearl as though she were the sun and stars combined as she walked toward him on the arm of Reverend Foster, who had agreed to give the bride away. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises of love and fidelity that moved many in the audience to tears. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Kade's kiss held all the promise of the future they would build together. The reception that followed was a joyous affair, with tables groaning under the weight of food contributed by every family for miles around. There was dancing and laughter, and Pearl found herself passed from partner to partner as the men of Whispering Pines welcomed her officially to their community. It was late evening when Pearl finally found a moment of quiet. She slipped away from the celebration to stand on the porch, gazing up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Yates, came Kade's voice as he joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Mrs. Yates, Pearl repeated, savoring the sound of her new name. I was just thinking about how different my life is from what I expected when I stepped off that train back in April. Disappointed, Kade murmured against her hair. Pearl turned in his arms, quite the opposite. This is far better than anything I could have imagined. Mama Pearl, Ellie's voice called as she bounded onto the porch. Mrs. Abernathy says it's time to cut the cake and then we can open presents, Pearl laughed, taking Ellie's outstretched hand. Well, we mustn't keep Mrs. Abernathy waiting, must we? Kade took Pearl's other hand, and together the three of them returned to their celebration, a family united by love both old and new. The years that followed brought changes to the Double Circle Ranch. The arrival of Thomas Kade Yates the following summer gave Ellie a brother she doted on endlessly. 2 years later, Catherine Rose Yates completed their family, named for the mother Ellie still spoke to in the wind from time to time. Pearl continued teaching, not just her own children but eventually others from neighboring ranches who would stay during the week, before returning home on weekends. The schoolroom expanded to accommodate the growing number of students, and Pearl found herself living the dream she'd had since childhood, teaching in a room filled with eager young minds. Kade's business prospered as well. With Pearl's help managing the accounts, the Double Circle expanded its holdings and became known throughout the territory for its fine horses and cattle. The library that had once been Catherine's sanctuary became a family gathering place, with new books added regularly to the already impressive collection. On a warm spring evening 10 years after she'd first taken shelter in an abandoned barn, Pearl sat on the porch swing, watching Kade teach 7-year-old Thomas to throw a lasso while 12-year-old Ellie guided little Catherine's first attempts at braiding hair. "Penny for your thoughts," Kade said, abandoning the lasso lesson to join his wife on the swing. Pearl smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "I was thinking about wind and voices and the strange paths that lead us home," Kade nodded, understanding as always. "Do you remember what you said to Ellie that first day, about being the voice she misses?" "I remember. You became that and so much more." Kade pressed a kiss to her temple. "For all of us." Across the yard, Ellie looked up and waved, her golden hair shining in the setting sun. Pearl waved back, her heart full to bursting with love for this family that had become her own. "Mama," Ellie called. "Come see what Catherine did." Pearl rose, squeezing Kade's hand before crossing the yard to admire her younger daughter's handiwork. As she moved, a warm breeze swept across the ranch, lifting her hair and bringing with it the scent of wildflowers from the distant hills. "Thank you," Pearl whispered to the wind, to Catherine, to whatever forces had guided her steps to this place and these people. "Thank you for leading me home." And somewhere, perhaps, Catherine heard and smiled, knowing her family was whole again, bound together by love that transcended even the barrier between life and death. The wind carried Pearl's whisper away, up toward the endless Montana sky where stars were just beginning to appear, eternal witnesses to the enduring power of hearts that refuse to forget and souls brave enough to love again.